Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson. I know if you're watching this that you're enjoying the Bumps and Thumps podcast. In order to continue the podcast and get the guests on that everyone wants to hear about, we need support from listeners like you. There are a few ways you can do this. One is going to anchor.fm, which will be on the bottom of your screen here, and click the support button. There you can make a monthly contribution to support the podcast. There's also, we have a Teespring store. We have a link down at the bottom of the screen as well for that. And we have products such as t-shirts like this one I'm wearing, backpacks, glassware, and other great items for you to purchase. Those purchases go directly back into the podcast and get on guests that require financial compensation. Thank you again for your support. Go to those websites and support our podcast, and we will continue to bring the guests that you want to hear about, past and present. And thank you for your support and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. My guest today has been a part of the wrestling business for over 32 years. He was a mild-mannered accountant by day and a pro wrestling referee in the evening and the weekends. He has refereed in the AWA, NWA, WWF, and many indie promotions. He recently authored a book titled Ring Man that talks about his time in wrestling. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Dave Dwinell. Dave, thanks for coming on the show today. Appreciate it.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure. I've looked at some of your past shows and I was quite impressed.
I really appreciate it. Full disclosure, folks, Dave reached out to me, which is rare. I usually have to reach out to everybody I've had on this show. So it's an honor and pleasure that he reached out to me, and we were able to get this going today. So I appreciate it, Dave. Thank you so much. And let's talk a little bit about you growing up. You kind of talked to me a little bit before the show started. Growing up, your childhood. So where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in central Massachusetts in a small town called Millbury, which, as you could probably guess, had about 8 or 9 mills in it. It was a blue-collar town. Everybody knew everybody, kind of like Mayberry of Andy Griffith. Today, it's a little bit different there. It's a suburb of Boston, which is 40 minutes away. The mills are now condos. They're all closed, and many mansions have been popping up. And downtown is deserted because everybody goes to the mall outside of town. But it was a wonderful place to grow up, and came from a big family, had about 30 cousins up in the area, and only 2 of us kind of left the area. We felt that there was life outside Millbury.
Yeah. Okay, let's schooling. So you're an accountant. So obviously you had to go to school. Where did you go to school, and what was that like for you?
Well, I went to John Carroll University out in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had started off with sociology and kind of changed to accounting. And after college, I actually went into teaching in the private sector at a prep school up in Hyde Park, New York. Found out you couldn't make a whole lot of money teaching in a prep school, and actually the school closed. So obviously I wasn't going to hang around there. So I ended up moving outside of New York City, Westchester County, and eventually ended up taking a job at the Trade Center in Manhattan. And I kind of got involved in accounting work, even though I'm not a CPA or anything like that. But just through luck, I was able to land a job at the Trade Center. I answered a blind ad, believe it or not, and showed up to fill out the paperwork. And fellow walks by and says, "Are you Dave Dwinell?" And I go, "Well, yes, I am." And he goes, "Oh, you coached my son in basketball." I said, "Oh." He says, "I'm vice president of the company. We'll see what we can do." And I ended up with a job. So it was, quite fortuitous.
That's great. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, let's talk about getting started in wrestling. Based on your background, you don't seem like the typical person that would get into the business, even as a referee. So kind of walk us through how you started in that, how you got involved.
Well, I mentioned in the book that to the uninformed observer, I probably looked like a suit and tie wearing, briefcase carrying nerd. But when I got into the locker room and got the powder blue shirt and the bow tie, you kind of become like Walter Mitty or Superman. You take on a different persona. But my actual introduction to wrestling was in 1959. My father had brought home for Christmas a box with a cord called a television set. And there were 3 channels with snow on it. And my brother and I were going through the 3 channels, and I said, gee, there's not much of interest to me. And then we see these 2 guys beating the crap out of each other in the middle of a ring. And I'm 12 years old at the time, maybe, or 11, and he's 10 or 9. And I'm my brother, and I'm going, what is this? It's not boxing. They're not wearing gloves. And I became fascinated with this. And all of a sudden, this guy appears called Ray Morgan, who did Capital Wrestling, which was the original WWF at the time. I believe at the time they were part of the NWA. And Ray is sitting at ringside, smoking a cigarette, drinking coffee, speaking into a microphone, going, and stay tuned next week when we have Haystack Calhoun against Killer Kowalski. And I'm going, oh my God, I got to watch this. So my brother and I became fascinated. So in those days, of course, you didn't have internet, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have anything. So we had to kind of do in the summertime something to take up our time. So we formed a wrestling league on our front lawn. And wow. Sometimes I'd be the face like Bobo Brazil, or sometimes I'd be the heel like Kowalski. And to do a pin, you had to count 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, and sometimes the fights over whether it was a pin or a quick count were fiercer than the actual battles themselves. And we eventually decided we were going to go see a live show at the Worcester Memorial Auditorium. And we went to a live show just as I finally, after 2 weeks of begging my mother, I was in high school at the time, she let us go by ourselves because my parents would have ruined it for me. We got front row seats. And I looked around, and it's all blue collar workers, smoking, drinking. You could hardly see the ring because of the smoke, betting on the matches. And I go, we're kind of like the only kids here. And Bruno Sammartino was against the Hawaiian Giant, Curtis Iakia. Johnny Rodz was on the show, a real hothead. He got thrown in front of me a few times and clenched his fist at me. And it answered the question for me. Was it real? Absolutely. They had the same bumps and bruises I had wrestling with my brother. So that was my interest. That was my introduction to wrestling. And of course, I cheered Bruno on, and I got to meet Bruno at the World's Fair. And he actually spent 10 minutes talking to me, which I thought was fantastic. I was in high school. I waited for everybody to leave. He was at the Budweiser Pavilion, I think it was, carrying 2 quarter kegs on his shoulders around. And I waited until after he did this, and everybody left, and I went home and I said, Bruno, I'd like to talk to you. And he goes, absolutely, but let me sit down. I'm exhausted. And he spent 10 minutes. Now, how many world champions would spend 10 minutes talking to a high school kid? I don't want to talk too much. And
no, it's this what this is all about, talking. So that's interesting that you talked to Bruno Sammartino for 10 minutes and he didn't charge you $50 or anything. But back in those days, things were a lot different.
Well, and I figured I'd never have a chance to see him again because I was still living in Millbury at the time. Well, as I mentioned before, I moved to Westchester County outside New York City. I was working at the Trade Center. And on Monday nights, I used to, once a month, we'd watch the Madison Square Garden live. And I'd have a bunch of friends over and we'd have a few brewskis. And I made the comment, gee, that ref's doing a terrible job. So my friend goes, yeah, and you could do a better job? I said, probably. So, well, why don't you? So the next day I said, you know what? At the suggestion of a friend, I'm going to look into this. So I couldn't find a number. There was no internet in those days. I couldn't find a number for the WWF. So I found Capital Wrestling. So I called Capital Wrestling 25 times. Nobody answers. Finally, on the 26th time, I don't know if it was Toots Mondt or Willie Gilsenberg, but I got on the phone. I said, is this Capital Wrestling? Yeah, who wants to know? I said, well, my name's Dave Dwinell. What do you want? I said, well, I want to be a referee with you. We don't need any. I said, okay. I said, can I send you a resume? Don't send me any gifts, kid. The answer will still be no. And he hangs up. I said, well, that went well. And I said, I'm not giving up. I looked up their physical address and I found it. And I went to it, and it turned out to be the Holland Hotel in Manhattan.
Oh.
So every day at lunchtime for 3 weeks, I went at lunchtime to see if I could find somebody coming in or out from the WWF. Well, finally, the doorman comes out and he says, can I ask you something? Are you a cop, a private eye, a stalker, or are you just a nut? And I said, well, I'm looking for somebody from the WWF. And he goes, they're here once a month for a couple of days. Evidently, they used a room there as their office when in New York. So he said, if you don't leave now, and you better not come back, I'll have you arrested for stalking. I said, okay. So I said, well, this ain't going to work. I give up. Well, about a month later, I'm the master of ceremonies at our church's 100th anniversary, and I run into this guy called Mickey DeFate. And he was with the box. He had been a boxer, and I figured maybe he'll know something about wrestling. He said, yeah, I'll tell you how to get a license. Stop by my office tomorrow on Jackson Avenue. So I drive up down Jackson Avenue 10 times. His office is a hot dog truck. And I walk in, he says, here, start helping me serve hot dogs. So I serving hot dogs with him, and he says, look, you want to get a license, any wrestling promoter in New York has to be licensed by New York State. And he goes, I will get a couple of, with your background, having taught and coached, I get a couple of politicians to recommend you to the state commission, which they did. So I get a packet in the mail to fill out, send in a $50 check and fill this out. Non-refundable, that's the state. 2 weeks later, I get a license. I'm now certified to referee in New York.
Wow.
I said, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Except they never called me. So 3 months go by and I'm going, well, I'm not paying them $50. I'll tell them, give me my money back if you're not going to call me. So the office was right around the corner from the athletic commission. The athletic commission was right around the corner from the trade center. So I walk over and I speak to this clerk and I said, you know, I'd like to work. You gave me a license. I want to work. Oh, we'll call you shortly. Well, 3 months went by. And I guess shortly for him was different than me. So I go back. And this time, Mickey told me, you want to speak to the boss. Tell the clerk, forget it. So we started arguing and yelling. And the boss comes up, the chairman of the commission. So he says, come into my office. And I told him I had been involved in politics. I ran for mayor of our small community, happened to be in a party he was appointed in. He says, you're going to work. So 2 weeks later, I get a call and they assign me to the Westchester County Center, holds 5,000 people with the WWF. And I'm going, what do I do now? I've never talked to a wrestler. I don't know if it's fake. Could they hurt me if they don't like me? So I went and borrowed every VHS tape known to mankind and watched the referee. So I show up at the county center and I'm going, well, this may be the first and the last. So Arnold Skolin was the promoter with his wife, Betty.
Okay.
And this is back in 1982. And I had known Arnold because he lived near me and we used to meet at this coffee shop. He'd be there, I'd be there, and we'd talk wrestling. So I show up with my little suitcase. I never brought a gym bag. I always brought a little suitcase. And Arnie goes, Dave, you going on vacation? And I said, no, I'm one of your referees. And he was totally in shock. Excuse me. And I'm dripping a little bit with the sinuses.
You're fine.
He's totally in shock. So he says, it's getting late, Dave. You better go up and talk to Rods. My first match was Johnny Rods, the hothead that had been thrown in my feet a few years prior. It was against Johnny Rods against 21-year-old Eddie Gilbert.
Wow.
So he says, go up and talk to Rods. So I'm going up the stairs to the Fields locker room and I'm going, what do I talk about? The weather? How's the wife? Is wrestling fake? I said, this is not going to end too well. So I walk in the locker room and Johnny's tying his boots and Johnny calls me over and he says, first match, kid? I go, how'd you know? He goes, I know. Now, I didn't know Johnny broke in the talent for Vince. He broke in a lot of talent for Vince Sr. Trusted Johnny because Johnny, everybody goes, well, how did a jobber get in the Hall of Fame? A jobber, He was a great wrestler, and he broke in so many. I mean, in wrestling, people don't understand. You could have a horrible wrestler who's the face, who's really over, and the guy that makes him is the heel. And Johnny was well respected in business. As a matter of fact, Jack Briscoe, who was a great champion, said that Johnny Rods could have a match with a broom and make the broom look good. So the greatest thing that could have happened to me was I had Johnny Rods. So Johnny calls me over, put me at ease, said, let's work together. You're going to disqualify me at the end of the match, and you are going to tell me I'm going to have the commission fine you $1,000 if you push me again. He made me an integral part of the match. Okay. Yeah. And he got me through the first match. And from that on, they put a new athletic commissioner in who happened to be friends of friends. And he said, Dave, I'm going to give you a shot. I'm going to go to the county center. I'm going to watch you. If you can work, we'll use you. If you can't, we won't. He said, Dave, you were good. We're going to call you. And they started calling me on a regular basis. So I know it's a long, detailed story, but that's basically how I ended up in the ring, which is kind of really unusual. I guess there were no wrestling schools in those days.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty amazing that you actually had known some of these people. I mean, the commissioner, all that kind of thing. And how you got involved. It's because it's actually a very neat story that how that happened.
Well, nobody really wanted to be a wrestling referee in those days. It was really boxing. The commission handled boxing and wrestling was kind of considered second best. I mean, the magazines, many of the magazines, they had wrestling in back of the boxing. Ring magazine, for example, you'd buy a magazine when I was a kid. Boxing would be in the front, and they have a few pages of wrestling. Yeah,
so you kind of started when in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And my understanding is, at that time, there were so many different territories. You had the big three, well, what many consider the big three, the AWA, the NWA, and the WWF. And you started out in the WWF. When did you, some other great matches. Did you ever, like you said, Johnny Rods, you did some title matches. What was in that time when you first started, what was probably your, I don't want to say favorite, but most memorable match that you worked?
That's an easy question. Excuse me. Bruno Sammartino, who came out of retirement for a few matches. Okay. I happened to be lucky enough to do Bruno against Bob Orton Sr., Randy Orton's father, at the county center. I have a wonderful picture of it. There was a man, it wasn't televised, but there's a man in the front row that had a zoom lens camera. So I went out my street clothes before and I said, look, if Bruno wins, would you please take a picture? Me raising his hand. So I got in a ring and Bruno wins, but via count out. So we were in the wrong side of the ring. So I'm trotting Bruno all the way around the other side of the ring. And Bruno goes, are we on television? And I said, no, I'll explain in the locker room, but you have to come with me. So we trotted around the entire ring till we got to the cameraman and I raised his hand. And when we got back to the locker room, he got the biggest kick out of that. And I guess he probably thought, God, this guy's a fan. He's not a worker. But you know what? For that match, I was a fan. Yeah. Because here's a guy I met in high school that I watched at the county center, and I'm in a ring with him. Yeah. And obviously he sold out the Garden for so many years. I mean, it was just a thrill to be in the same ring with the living legend. That's probably, without a doubt, not probably, it's without a doubt the greatest match I ever worked. And the second greatest was actually USA Pro Wrestling came in with the NWA, AWA. Remember, Vince was going into their territory, so they came in to invade his territory. And I got to work with Nick Bockwinkel against, I'm sorry. That's all right. Oh, Nick Bockwinkel against Rick Martel for the title, AWA title. But what made that match special was in the corner of Nick Bockwinkel was Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, the first WWF champion. Yeah. So I got to work with 3 champions in one match. Yeah. And I'll never forget I'll never forget pointing at Rogers, and he was giving me heat at the end of the match because Bockwinkel's leg was over the rope and I missed it, and I counted to 3, and he was in my face and ready to hit me. And I said, I cannot believe I'm arguing. And you know the sad part, a lot of people in the audience had no idea who he was.
Yeah.
That was kind of the sad part.
Yeah.
But what a match.
Yeah. I'll tell you, yeah, you mentioned that. I didn't see Buddy Rogers much as a kid. I knew more as a, the manager, because he managed Snuka for a while and all that.
Right.
But you mentioned the name, even Nick Bockwinkel today, to a younger fan, they're not going to know who he is. And that's pretty unfortunate. I mean, that guy, I couldn't stand that guy when I was a kid. He was such a good heel. But
well, him and Heenan got some heat. I believe Bobby Heenan was his manager.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
And they got some heat. You talk about heat.
Yeah. I could not stand those two, and they did their job very, very well. I will say that. So, okay.
Well, the funny part for me was I enjoyed working more with the legends when I was refereeing than with the guys that maybe even were on top at that point in time. Guys like Harley Race, guys like, excuse me, guys like Nick Bockwinkel, people of that nature, were just such marvelous technicians that I don't think we'll ever see some of the likes again.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was a kid when those guys were probably in their prime, in the 70s. I was a young kid, but I remember them. And I think another one that's underappreciated that you probably did some matches is probably Bob Backlund.
Yes, I worked more with Bob on the independent circuit after he had left with Northeast Wrestling. Michael Lombardi with Northeast Wrestling here is very big on the East Coast and has been for a long time. And I was his senior referee for 16 years.
Okay.
Matter of fact, when I started out with Michael, I was his only referee. I'd do 7 or 8 matches back in those days.
Yeah.
And I worked with Bob several times on the independent circuit. Bob was a champion when I came in, and I did not work with him in WWF, but I did work with him in the independent. And one of the things I respect phenomenally about Bob is we had a match, and he was wrestling kind of a nobody, a no name, maybe a local kid. Before the match, Bob goes, let's let the kid work. Let him get some high spots. Let him do his thing. Let's make him look good in front of the crowd. I don't want to do a squash match. I'm not going to do a 5-minute match. I want to give the people something. And you have to respect somebody like that, because not everybody would do that.
Yeah.
And he was a real gentleman. I have so much respect for him. I have so much respect for him because of the fact that that's the way he approached the business and see him and Bruno Sammartino and people of that nature, Harley Race, they had such respect. Not that they don't today, but they had such respect for the business. And Bruno, I don't know if you knew this or not, Bruno would not have an alcoholic beverage. He liked to have a wine with dinner, but if he was in a restaurant and there were kids in a restaurant, he wouldn't have a drink.
Oh, I did not.
Because he felt that it was not proper for a champion to drink in front of young people. It wasn't a good thing. And I'll tell you, if I could do another story about Bruno.
Sure, go ahead.
He was commenting on a match that I did one night. He was a commentator, and we went out for dinner after, and I happened to be sitting next to him. And I was relatively young referee at the time. And Bruno said something to me that I carried throughout my career. He said, Dave, I want to tell you something. If there's 5 people in the arena, or 50, or 5,000, or 50,000, or 100,000, he goes, you work your tail off, because those people might have saved their money for weeks to see that match, and you owe them all you can give. So never look at the crowd, just always work the same and give people what they deserve. And see, to me, that man never forgot his humble beginnings.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's amazing that you mentioned some of those names. Quick story for you. Harley Race, before he passed away, this was probably 10 years ago now.
I was at one of his WLW events in Springfield, and it was probably the first one I'd been to of his. And I had a action figure of him in the box still, and I was walking by his truck, and I pointed to him, and I told my wife, I said, "Hey, that's Harley Race. I want to make sure and see him inside before the match, so he can sign it for me." And he looked up and saw me, and he waved to me to come over, and he goes, "You want me to sign that for you?" I said, "Yeah, I'll wait till you're inside. I don't want to bother you while you're outside here taking a break or whatever." He goes, "No, no, no, give it to me." And I gave it to him. I handed him a marker. He signed it 8 times, world champion, Harley Race. Handed it back to me. He goes, "Thanks for coming out, and I'll see you inside." And I just was in awe. You wouldn't find that today, I don't think, with wrestlers of today's era. You see some and they're going to, "Oh yeah, come here, I'll sign your stuff real quick." I mean, I don't think, but I just thought it was a great gesture from such a legend.
Well, the true legends that's why they're legends, because they have a feeling and an empathy. I mean, people forget that the fans are the most important element in wrestling. Without fans, there is no wrestling. I mean, my book is dedicated to all wrestling fans of all ages and generations, because without the fans, we're nothing. What do we have? We have no one to perform in front of. And I was a fan, and I still am. And I don't think there's anything to be ashamed in that. For those who really love the business. I will tell you one thing though. There was a story, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but a former champion, a well-known champion, was in it was either train station or the airport, and a kid went over and asked for his autograph, and the person was reading the paper, and he wanted to charge him $100 because he said, "You're going to sell it on the internet." And a kid goes, "No, I'm a fan." He goes, "No, you're going to sell it on the internet, $100." Father came over and said, "Really?" And he goes, "Really?" So that's how it's changed.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, because probably most of the time does what happened. Unfortunately, they'll get the autograph and then they'll sell it. Now, a lot of them, if you put your name on it, they'll say to whoever your name is and then sign it. A little more challenging to get rid of it, but yeah, unfortunately that's true. So I kind of, I get it, but I also am like, okay, they're paying to see you sign the darn whatever it is, a picture or action figure. So,
but in fairness to the guys today, it's a completely different era, a completely different story. Mm-hmm. And this is where all sports people kind of like are at. And I'm not going to knock them for doing this. I mean, because they also have to strike while the iron is hot, because next month they may be gone. Yeah. So they kind of have to strike, while the iron is hot. I could tell you a funny story though about signing autographs. One night I was working, I think the Ridgewood Grove Arena around Queens or Brooklyn, wherever. I think it's Queens. It was in Queens. It's closed many years, and it was raining a little bit. And I'm out front, and I'm signing about 30 autographs. Okay. And on the 31st, I said to this kid, it was all kids. I said to this kid, I said, "Why would you want my autograph?" And I was feeling pretty good. And I said, "Why would you want my autograph?" He goes, "You're the only free one, and you're better than nobody." Leave it to a kid to bring you back to reality. You know what? You know what I'm saying? So that was pretty.
That's a good one. I like it. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to WrestleCon at the end of this month down in Dallas. It's about a few hours from where I'm from. And, you got to pay. You pay to get in the event, and then you pay for whatever autograph. You can go up and talk to them for a few minutes or whatever. Mm-hmm. But if you want an autograph, you want a photo with them, they charge you extra. Which I understand, they gotta make money on it for being there, but it's gonna be a huge event, and I'm glad it's close enough, because I've never been to one. I'm pretty excited about it. It's kind of like I guess like Comic-Con or whatever those other ones are. So it's, a lot of legends are there too. So
It sounds like it's going to be really a lot of fun.
yeah, I think it will be. My wife's going with me. She's not much of a fan, but she's going to do it because, it's me, and I do stuff for her that go to stuff with her that I don't really particularly care for. But that's what marriage is about, right? Give and take.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about my wife. I was during intermission, I'm out in the, my wife used to come to some of the shows, especially when I get older, because I was probably close to 60 or in my 60s when I retired. And I met a fan out at the hot dog counter. And he said, "Oh, Ref, I met your wife. She was sitting behind." He said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yeah." I look back and there's a woman reading a book, and she's got she's got napkins on, it was bleachers. She used to sit way up in them. She had the napkins on the bleachers, having a little snack and reading a book. And the guy turns around and he says, "Lady, can I ask you a question? You don't look like you belong here. Why would you buy a ticket and come here?" She goes, "Oh, I'm married to the older referee. If he gets hurt, someone will have to take him to the hospital." The older referee. I said, you just couldn't say the referee, But so I know what you mean when you say the wives. They're good.
They're good. They give and take just like we do. So I appreciate her. She's a good woman, and
Mhm.
one of those things that people, the same thing, kind of look at me when I go to these events, more of the the indie ones. They're like, one person come up to me and says, "You don't look like you should be here." I'm like, "What do you mean?" Because I was, I guess, had more dressier or something. I wore a collared shirt. I don't remember, but he just kind of said, "Well, you just look like a business guy and you should be doing something else." I was just like, No, I really enjoy this, or I wouldn't be here. So understand that.
Well, I could certainly see that you do enjoy it.
I do. Oh, yeah, you look at for those of you watching, you can see the background. Yeah, I I do. I've loved it since I was a kid. My parents thought I was crazy. Uh, People that know me, that don't know me, other than when I was in the Army for a long 26 years, if they didn't know me outside of work and they saw me at something, or I had something like that, they'd be like, "That doesn't seem like you." And I'm like, "Well, I'm different when I'm off work than at work."
Well, I think people had the same reaction to me. If I happen to mention it, excuse me, I was doing shows. I actually traveled a little bit. I traveled quite a bit,
Mhm.
not necessarily with the WWF. I was lucky enough to hit it with three really good independents, and
Mhm.
they used me almost exclusively. They liked the way I worked with the wrestlers. They liked the fact that I worked hard in the ring and this kind of stuff. And so I was very fortunate to have a lot of work. I would be for someone who did this part time. I never did this full time. I always had a legit job.
Yeah.
Actually, my last job for 23 years was running the largest tax collection agency for town in New York. I was elected receiver of taxes, and I actually collected Freddie Blassie's taxes, Arnold Skolin, and Paul Heyman's parents' taxes.
I'm sure they loved you for that.
Oh yeah. Well, if I could tell a Freddie Blassie story, I'd
Let's
love to.
hear it.
Freddie was one of my favorite people. He lived 20 minutes from me. And first time I worked with Freddie, the WWF used to appear at high schools and colleges back in the 80s. And we did a high school show in one of the worst sections of Brooklyn. It was like my third or fourth match out at Bedford-Stuyvesant. And I show up at the show, and Arnold Skolin was in charge. It was a small show at a Catholic high school. And I'd always wanted to meet Freddie. So I see Freddie sitting there. So we started talking. And for some reason, we both hit it off really good. Now, Freddie thought he was the toughest wrestler of all time. So I used to bait him. Every time I'd see him, I'd say, "Hey, Freddie, I heard Gorgeous George," even though he had the appearance of kind of a little bit of a fairy. I said, "I heard he was a tough wrestler." "Ah, shit, he didn't know the difference between a toenail and a toe hold." I said, "Okay." So we get in the ring. We're in the ring now, and he's the Ayatollah Blassie managing the Sheik. So he calls me over and he says, "Dave, look at the crowd." He goes, "Holy shit, they're tougher looking than the wrestlers." He goes, this is going to be a little rough. Now, we used to get paid according to the number of people that showed up at a show. So the Garden would be top paid, the Coliseum, Nassau Coliseum would be top paid. These small shows would be small pay, maybe $50, $75, $100. But it depended on the number of people in the crowd. So Freddie looks up in the balcony and he sees a man weighing about 350 pounds sitting on two chairs. So Freddie goes, when you get back to the locker room, Dave, you tell Skolin to go up there and make sure that guy bought 2 tickets, because one more ticket could put us into the next pay category. So I said, I don't think Arnie's going to want to go up and ask this guy. But I said, well, I just hope the balcony doesn't fall with this guy sitting up there. And Freddie goes, well, what the hell are we here? We're getting paid. We'll go home early. So that was Freddie. But the best story of Freddie, if you don't mind me telling, he came into the tax office. He used to say, Dave, how can I get my taxes lowered? I'd say, move out of Westchester. But he'd come into the office one day and he's pounding on the outer office on the counter with his cane, his gold cane. He's pounding, saying, where's the supervisor? Who's the mayor? Where's the supervisor's office? Where's the supervisor's office? I'm going to go in and body slam him on his desk. So one of my people who worked for me comes running into my office. He said, there's a crazy man in our office. I said, that's not a crazy man, it's Freddie. You know him? I said, I work with him. Huh? So I went out, I said, Freddie, come into the office, we'll talk. I said, Freddie, why are you going to go body slam the mayor? I said, I can't let you do that. I said, if you do that, I'll have to call the cops. He goes, shit, you'll be calling the ambulance. So I said, Freddie, what's the problem? He said, I got wild cats running around my lawn. And he said 2 weeks ago he'd take care of it, and he didn't. So where's his office? We'll take care of him. I'll get him in an arm lock. I said, Freddie, I'll call the animal warden. I did. And I said, they'll be taken care of. And they did. And I spared the life of the
mayor.
Life of the mayor. But Freddie, his proudest moment was being banned from the Garden, because in his match with Bruno, people were ripping out seats and throwing them in a ring. And Freddie was really a character. He was one of the big characters that I met. You know, he was never off. He was never off screen. Even him and I talking alone, it was Freddie. He actually started out in the days when they were in carnivals. Back in the 30s, he started as Sailor Freddie Blassie. And after he'd come out of the war, I guess, in the 40s. So he was a character.
Yeah, he was a character. I mean, I don't remember him as a wrestler. I remember him as a manager in the, WWF, the Ayatollah.
Yeah,
and,
the Ayatollah.
Yeah, he was a character. Let's talk about, you've been honored by some organizations. Most notably, I did the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2011.
Joe Bruin, right? Joe Bruin inducted me. It was a great honor, unexpected, great honor.
Yeah. Talk about when you got that call, your emotions when you got up there. What was that like for you?
Well, about a year before, I'd have been inducted into the Northeast Wrestling Hall of Fame in its initial class, along with Bam Bam Bigelow and Kurt Adonis. And that was totally unexpected. And then when Joe called me a year later for the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, it again was unexpected. But because as a referee, like I said, nobody really basically ever paid to see a referee. My job was to make the guys look good. But I think probably because I stuck around for so long and I worked for so many various promotions, I did get to work with the NWA when they came to New York, and I did a tour with them overseas in Germany. And I very much enjoyed working with them. I had a chance to work with people like, I'm trying to think of the fellow's name. He was hurt in a plane crash. He never wrestled again. I can't think.
Was it Bobby Shane? No.
It may come to me. But anyway, I had a chance to work with the NWA people, and I guess probably because I stayed around so long, that, you know, that was one of the reasons maybe, and also because of my work ethic, I think, in the ring. Uh, and, and again, I never expected to be inducted into a couple of wrestling halls of fame. And I was honored with a 25-year plaque from Northeast Wrestling. And I was shocked and surprised and very, very honored and very humbled. I mean, I got inducted into the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame with people like Jay Strongbow, Rick Martel. Let's see who else. There was a number of really great
Yeah.
guys, and what an honor to be associated. Howard Finkel was the master of ceremonies, and it was just a terrific experience.
Yeah.
And again, very humbling.
Yeah.
Because again, as a ref, you never wanted to take away from the boys. You wanted to work with them, and I think they appreciated that. Because and not a knock on state officials, but not all state officials, I don't think, understood the wrestling game.
Right.
When I started in '82, I was told by the older officials, if they ever touch you, you disqualify them on the spot. Well, I'm saying to myself, yeah, it'll never work again. You know, so they took it to be like it was boxing. And they approached it as if it was boxing, and you couldn't do that. I mean, I was too much of a fan to see what I was supposed to do. So again, it was very humbling.
Yeah, I mean, being inducted into those Hall of Fames, I mean, as a referee especially, is quite special, and says a lot about you as a person, as a worker, in the business. You don't see a lot of referees being inducted into Hall of Fames. So hats off to you, sir.
Well, thank you for that. Could I give you a funny story though about, I talked
Please.
about Chief Jay Strongbow being inducted with him, and Samu. And by the way, it should be noted, and I do have it on my Facebook. Somebody sent it to me, much to my displeasure. Do you remember when Rikishi and his cousin, the partner, they were the Samoan Savages? It was Rikishi and someone else, another Samoan, Umaga, before he was Umaga. They used to do a dance in the ring, which was almost like a break dance.
Yeah.
And they insisted that I do it with them. And it was voted the worst referee to do a Umaga dance in the ring with these two guys of anyone. Now I've totally forgotten your question.
No, I was just saying that being in the business for that long and being recognized, it says a lot about you and your work ethic, because you don't hear of a lot of referees being recognized by a wrestling Hall of Fame. So I just said it was your character. And no, I just said I really appreciate it. So, I just wanted to let you know that. And then
thank you.
My last question is, what are you doing now?
Well, I've been retired for 10 years. I live up in the Catskill Mountain area, which is about 2.5 hours from New York City. Beautiful retirement type of area to retire to. I've been doing several things. I wrote the book. It gave me an opportunity to write the book, which is about almost just short of 300 pages with about 40 photographs in it. And again, it's not a book that throws anybody under the bus.
Right.
It's a fan-based book that shows my appreciation for the time I spent in and again, it's dedicated to fans.
Yeah.
And it talks about my career, and a lot of very, very funny and interesting behind the scenes stories about those days back in the 80s and 90s, when things were kayfabe was in play. People thought it was real. The people weren't allowed in the locker room. It was just for the referee and the wrestlers. And it was a different time and era. And I wanted to share that with, and it got a good review, by the way, from Slam Wrestling out of Canada.
Yeah. I just did a podcast with Greg Oliver.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did one Monday night.
Oh,
Yeah, great guy. Had a
yeah,
good conversation
yeah.
with him.
Yeah, so they gave me a really, really positive review. I mean, I was nervous about writing a book because I'm
Mhm.
not a name. People aren't going to recognize Dave Dwinell. And on some of the other podcasts, some of the people said, well, we had no idea who the heck you were. But when we started investigating some of the
Mm.
stories you had and this and that, we
Yep.
thought it would be great to have
Yep.
you on. So I was fortunate there. So
Yep.
I wrote the book and it's going well. And I've been to a
Good.
few fan conventions and it's all well because I priced the book at $14.99
Mhm.
and the Kindle or the ebooks, and they're available on Amazon and all over the place.
Mhm.
They're that's $5.99. I wanted to. I didn't expect to make a lot of money off it. I
Mm.
wanted to share my experiences, and it gave me something to do in retirement. The other thing
Yeah.
I'm doing is I'm working with the International Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame, which
Okay.
is being set up in Albany, New York. They're going to be they're going to be located at the Times Union Center, which is the big civic center in Albany. They have the WWF on a regular, semi-regular
Mhm.
basis, and they're going to be located right there where all these sporting events are taking place.
Mhm.
We're going to be setting this up. I'm helping the founder, Seth Turner, and also Michael Lanudo, who's working very closely with him. We're
Mhm.
going to be doing what we can to set it up so there'll be a place to honor the International Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Okay.
We had our first, they had the first dinner last year, and they
Mhm.
honored past wrestlers who had passed away. Their inductees were past wrestlers who passed away, and also American, foreign, so forth. And I'm kind of excited about working with them on that.
Mhm.
And I also have a love for music, although I don't play an instrument. I put
Yeah.
together a New Orleans jazz band, which I love New Orleans
Oh, wow.
music. We put together a jazz band up here, which before COVID was going pretty well, but of course with COVID we had to back off quite a bit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm really keeping busy, and I was
Yeah.
through Facebook. I was
Yeah.
able to touch base with a lot of the wrestlers I'd lost contact with, guys I worked with, hadn't heard from in years. And what's kind of funny is a guy will tell me, "Hey Dave, I loved working with you," and he used his real name. Well, I didn't know most of the wrestlers' real names. I only knew their. So this guy was saying, "I'm so and so, and I worked with you, and I had to look up who he wrestled as in order to be able to know who I was being friends
Yeah.
with, because I had no idea their real name." So I'm keeping busy in retirement,
Yeah.
and my 6 grandkids keep me very busy. I love them dearly, and
Yeah.
they are the loves of my life. And along with my wife Valerie, who convinced me that you better retire because I had injured my knee at the end of my career. I never had
Wow.
an injury for 32 years, and rolling into the ring, I caught my boot on the outside of the ring and tore a meniscus muscle. And with the arthritis I had in there, I kept trying to wrestle. I kept trying to referee, and my knee caved in. I couldn't get up without grabbing the ropes. And finally, my wife threatened to divorce me if I didn't retire.
Oh,
So I owe an awful lot to her because she
yeah.
was always there for me at the end. She'd help me into the car when I could hardly walk, and I was stubborn. I wasn't giving up
Not a fight.
without a fight. So, God
That's
bless
great.
her and so forth.
That's amazing. You mentioned the International Wrestling Hall of Fame. I know I did a podcast probably 6 or 7 months ago now with Mac Davis. He was up there last year doing some stuff with that, and I don't know if you know him or not.
Yes, I do. I know the
Okay.
name. So I
Okay.
believe I did meet him up there.
Yeah.
Um,
Great guy too, and he was uh, going up there last year. I think he's going up again this year for it, and getting involved with that. So that's a great. I've kind of looked that up as well, and looks like a great organization. And I hope you guys continue what you're doing, up there. And with your book, Ringman, folks, I'll have that posted out in the description where you can purchase it in the description. And I want to thank one more time, Dave Dwinell. Thank you for coming on today, sir. I really appreciate it.
well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. And I always enjoy talking about pro wrestling, especially from the classic era.
Mhm.
And if I could say one last thing,
Please.
nowhere in the book do we knock today's wrestlers, just because I happen to come from a different era, possibly a little bit of a Cro-Magnon man, you might say.
Yeah.
But I respect and I have great admiration for the guys today, because they put their lives on the line going into the ring. People think it's all preordained, but there's always the element of danger when you step into the ring.
Yeah.
And I actually think it was dangerous years ago. I mean, I had darts sticking out of my boots one night. People were throwing darts because
Oh,
people
wow.
they were throwing beer canisters, they were throwing darts, and flashlight batteries were flying by, my size D. And
Oh,
you talk
boy.
about heat.
Yeah.
So people don't realize there is an element of danger. There's always a chance you can get hurt.
Mhm.
And my hat's off to the guys today.
Yeah.
It's a different time. They're bigger, they're quicker, like all sports.
Yeah.
Are they tougher? People say, oh, the old one's tougher than the new ones. No, they're both tough. They're just different time, different eras, and you really can't compare the two.
Yeah.
But my hat's off to anyone who puts the tights on and gets it.
All right. Well, from there, Mr. Dave Dwinell, thank you so much, sir, for coming on. I appreciate it. And folks, if you're listening, thank you. If you're watching, thank you. And we will talk to you soon.